Before darkness descended, there was only light, a pure, untainted radiance that bathed all creation. Before the chaos of war erupted, there existed a perfect, unbroken peace, a harmony that resonated throughout the celestial realms. And before the rise of the devil, there was Lucifer, an angel of such breathtaking beauty that his very name, Lightbringer, echoed his radiant essence. Tonight, I want to transport you back, not to a pivotal moment in human history, but to an era preceding humanity's very existence, a cataclysmic moment that shattered the heavens themselves. A moment when the most glorious being ever conceived dared to cast his gaze upon the throne of God and utter three fateful words, words that would reverberate through eternity. I will ascend. This is the saga of the war in heaven, a cosmic conflict that unfolded over 3 earth-shattering days, forever altering the foundation of all creation. This is the story of how Lucifer, the radiant morning star, transformed into Satan, the father of lies. Close your eyes. Let the cacophony of the world around you fade into silence, and allow me to guide you back to the beginning, to a realm of such unimaginable beauty and perfection that human language can scarcely capture its essence. Tonight, we shall attempt to paint that portrait. Remember that the images you might conjure are merely for illustration. There's no need to focus on them. Just listen, and let the story wash over you like a gentle tide, carrying you deeper into tranquility, deeper into serenity. And as you drift, never forget that the events of those 3 days continue to resonate even now. The battle that ignited in heaven rages on upon the earth, a conflict woven into the very fabric of our existence. But take heart, for the final chapter has already been written. Let us begin. Chapter 1. In the Genesis there was light. Before the earth took shape, before the stars were meticulously hung in the vast, velvet darkness of space, there was heaven. But heaven was not a place as we understand it. It wasn't constructed from stone, wood, or metal. Heaven was and is the dwelling place of God himself, a realm where light doesn't originate from a sun, but emanates from the very presence of the Almighty, a place where every surface glistens with an eternal radiance, where the air itself vibrates with worship, and where time flows differently than it does in our mortal world. Imagine, if you can, a boundless expanse of the purest crystal, stretching endlessly in every direction, reflecting the divine light in 1,000 different hues. Picture towers of light ascending like majestic mountains, their peaks disappearing into shimmering clouds of glory. Imagine rivers flowing not with water, but with liquid fire that does not burn, a life-giving, joy-inspiring stream that nourishes all who partake of it. And at the very heart of it all stands the throne. The throne of God is not crafted from gold, though gold would appear as mere dust in comparison. Nor is it fashioned from jewels, though every precious gem in creation would pale beside its magnificence. The throne is composed of glory itself, radiating light in waves, in colors that human eyes have never beheld. And from that throne emanates a sound, a voice not necessarily loud, but imbued with such profound authority, such boundless power, such unwavering love, that every created being trembles at its resonating force. Surrounding the throne, in perfect, unwavering order, stood the angels. Not hundreds, not thousands, but millions upon millions of celestial beings, each meticulously crafted by the hand of God for a specific, divinely ordained purpose. They were not all identical. Just as humans possess diverse roles, unique gifts, and individual callings, so too did the angels. There were the seraphim, beings of pure, unadulterated fire, who stood closest to the throne, their very essence a testament to divine power. They possessed 6 wings each. With 2 wings, they veiled their faces, for even they could not directly gaze upon the full, unfiltered glory of God. With 2 wings, they covered their feet in reverence, acknowledging their unworthiness in the face of such majesty. And with the remaining 2 wings, they soared, hovering above the throne, crying out in voices that reverberated through the foundations of heaven. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was, and is to come. Their voices were not harsh or grating, but akin to the sound of a colossal waterfall, powerful yet exquisitely beautiful, constant yet never monotonous. Day and night, without ceasing, they sang. And their song was not born of mere duty, but of profound, overflowing love. For they had witnessed the face of God, and having seen it, they could do nothing but worship, their entire being consumed by adoration. Below the seraphim stood the cherubim, mighty guardians of immense power and wisdom, each possessing four faces. The face of a man, representing intellect and reason. The face of a lion, embodying strength and courage. The face of an ox, symbolizing unwavering service and diligence. And the face of an eagle, representing farsightedness and divine vision. They represented the totality of creation, encompassing all of life, all of strength, all of wisdom, and all of majesty. Their wings were covered with eyes, thousands of eyes, seeing everything, missing nothing. They moved in perfect unison, never deviating from their path, always forward, always watching, always protecting the holiness of God. And then there were the archangels, the princes of heaven, the commanders of the angelic hosts. These were not mere servants, but leaders, warriors, messengers of the Most High. Each one wielded authority that could shake worlds. Each one bore a name that reflected their divine purpose. There was Michael, whose name translates to, "Who is like God?" He stood tall and imposing, his face like carved marble, radiating strength and resolve, and his eyes like flames of fire, burning with unwavering dedication. In his hand, he carried a sword that gleamed with holy light, a weapon forged not for wanton destruction, but for the defense of all that is good and true. Michael was the protector, the warrior, the one who would stand as an unyielding bulwark between evil and the throne of God, regardless of the personal cost. There was Gabriel, whose name signifies God is my strength. He was the messenger, the herald, the voice of heaven, entrusted with announcing the will of the Almighty. His wings were as white as freshly fallen snow, and when he spoke, his words carried the full weight of divine authority. He was swift, traversing the vast expanse between heaven and earth in the blink of an eye, delivering messages that would irrevocably alter the course of history. There was Raphael, the healer, whose very presence exuded comfort and restoration. His wings shimmered with a soft, golden light, and his face was gentle, filled with boundless compassion. He walked among the angels, tending to their needs, reminding them of God's unwavering love, his boundless mercy, and his endless grace. And then there was Lucifer, Lucifer the morning star, Lucifer the light-bearer, Lucifer the most beautiful of all created beings. If the other archangels were akin to flickering flames, Lucifer was like the sun itself, radiating an unmatched brilliance. His beauty was not merely physical, though his form was indeed perfect in every conceivable way. His beauty was deeper, more profound, emanating from within, a pure and unadulterated reflection of the divine glory that had been implanted within him. His wings were vast and magnificent, adorned with every precious stone imaginable. Sapphire and emerald, ruby and topaz, jasper and carnelian. When he moved, light danced across his wings in cascading waves of color, filling heaven with unparalleled splendor. His voice was unmatched in its beauty and power. It was said that when Lucifer sang, all of heaven fell silent to listen, captivated by the sheer perfection of his song. Even the seraphim momentarily paused in their ceaseless worship to hear the exquisite sound. His voice was pure, clear, powerful, and achingly beautiful. It could convey the full spectrum of human emotion: joy, sorrow, reverence, and triumph. It could soar to heights that made the very stars tremble, or descend to whispers that brought tears to the eyes of the angels. He was the worship leader of heaven, personally chosen by God himself to stand before the throne and lead all of creation in praise. It was the highest honor imaginable, the most sacred calling, and Lucifer fulfilled it with unparalleled excellence. He poured his entire being into his worship, weaving melodies that had never been heard before, harmonies that seemed to unlock new dimensions of beauty, resonating with the very fabric of creation. God loved him, not more than the others, for God's love is infinite and all-encompassing, but in a unique and special way. Lucifer was a masterpiece, a living testament to the boundless creative genius of the Almighty. He was proof that God does not create merely for function, but for beauty, for art, for the sheer, unadulterated joy of bringing something glorious into existence. And Lucifer knew it. He looked at himself and saw the splendor. He heard his own voice and marveled at its power. He saw the way the other angels looked at him with admiration, with respect, even with awe, and somewhere deep within the hidden recesses of his heart, a seed of darkness began to sprout. It was not a loud, boisterous thought at first. It was barely a whisper, easy to ignore, easy to dismiss, but it was there, like a tiny crack in a perfect diamond, invisible from the outside, but growing, spreading, patiently waiting for the opportune moment to shatter everything. For now, though, heaven remained at peace. The angels moved in perfect harmony, each fulfilling their divinely ordained role with unwavering joy and devotion. There was no discord, no jealousy, no strife. There was only worship, only service, only love. Michael stood at his post, sword in hand, watching over the throne with eyes that never closed, ever vigilant. Gabriel flew between the realms, carrying messages with unmatched speed and precision. Raphael tended to the needs of heaven with gentle hands and a compassionate heart. And Lucifer sang. He stood before the throne, his wings outstretched, his face lifted towards the light, and he sang. The sound filled every corner of heaven, weaving through the streets of gold, echoing off the crystal walls, rising up and up until it seemed to merge with the very voice of God himself. The other angels joined in, their voices blending seamlessly with his, creating a symphony of such breathtaking beauty that if a human ear could have heard it, the heart would have stopped from sheer, overwhelming joy. This was worship in its purest form. This was creation fulfilling its purpose. This was everything as it was meant to be. But even then, even in that moment of perfect, unadulterated beauty, the crack was spreading. Lucifer sang, and his voice was flawless. But his eyes, if anyone had bothered to look closely, were no longer fixed solely on the throne. They were drifting, just slightly, just for a moment, to his own reflection in the crystal beneath his feet. And in that reflection he saw himself, beautiful, powerful, glorious. And he began to wonder. The thought was still small, still quiet, but it was there and it was growing. Heaven did not know it yet, but the countdown had begun. The perfect peace was living on borrowed time. The light was about to be challenged by a darkness that had never existed before, a darkness that would not come from outside, but from within. For now the angels sang. The throne blazed with glory, and all of creation bowed in reverence before the one who made them. But the seed had been planted, and soon, very soon, it would sprout. The morning star was about to fall, and when he fell, he would not fall alone. Chapter 2. The Seed of Pride. There are moments in eternity that irrevocably change everything. Moments so seemingly insignificant, so quiet, that they pass unnoticed by all but one. Moments that transpire not in the thunder of battle or the blaze of glory, but in the profound silence of a single, carefully considered thought. For Lucifer, that moment arrived on what appeared to be an ordinary day in heaven. If heaven could even be said to have days, if eternity could be measured in moments, he stood, as he always did, before the throne. The light washed over him in waves, warm and pure, bathing him in its divine essence. The voices of the seraphim rose and fell in their endless song, their harmonious melodies filling the celestial air. The very presence of God permeated every space, every breath, every heartbeat of existence. Lucifer lifted his voice to join the chorus, his song a clear and powerful beacon in the celestial harmony. The sound that emanated from his lips was, as always, perfect. Notes cascaded from him like water from a pristine fountain, clear, bright, and beautiful. The other angels turned toward him, their faces glowing with joy at the sound of his voice. And in that moment, something subtly shifted. It was not the music itself. The music was flawless. It was not the worship. The worship was pure and heartfelt. It was something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface of the song, a discordant note in an otherwise perfect symphony. Lucifer sang. But for the first time in his existence, he was not thinking about God. He was thinking about himself. He noticed, as if for the first time, how the light caught on his wings, scattering rainbows across the crystal floor, painting the heavens with ephemeral beauty. He noticed how the other angels looked at him, their eyes filled with admiration, their gazes drawn to him like moths to a flame. He noticed the undeniable power in his own voice, the way it seemed to command attention, to draw every gaze toward him, captivating all who heard it. And he thought, I am magnificent. It was not an untrue thought. He was magnificent. God had made him that way, carefully crafting him in his own image. Every fiber of his being was designed for beauty, for excellence, for glory. But the thought did not stop there. I am magnificent, he thought again, his pride swelling within him. More magnificent than the others, more beautiful than Michael, more powerful than Gabriel, more splendid than any creature that has ever been made. Still, the thought continued, insidious and relentless. If I am so glorious, the whisper came from somewhere deep inside, a hidden chamber of his heart. Then why do I bow? Why do I serve? Why do I stand here singing praises to another when I myself am worthy of praise? The thought hit him like a lightning bolt, electrifying his soul and shaking him to his core. He faltered, just for a fraction of a second, the tremor running through his body. His voice caught in his throat. His wings trembled almost imperceptibly. It was so brief that no one else noticed, the blip of a dying star. The song continued around him, an oblivious tide that did not pause for his storm. The worship flowed on without interruption, a river of devotion that was unmoved by his crisis. But Lucifer noticed. He stopped singing, the silence a sudden rupture in the harmony. His mouth closed, his eyes, which had been lifted reverently toward the throne, slowly lowered, his gaze falling away from the divine. He looked down at his hands, at the light that seemed to emanate from his very skin, bathing his form in a celestial glow. He looked at his reflection in the polished surface beneath his feet, and for the first time, he did not see a servant, a humble instrument of God's will. He saw a rival. The thought should have horrified him. It should have sent him to his knees in repentance, crying out to God for mercy, for cleansing, for the removal of this insidious poison that had taken root in his mind. But he did not cry out. Instead, he stood there in silence, turning the thought over and over in his mind like a priceless jewel, examining it from every possible angle, savoring its power. Why should I bow? The voice whispered again, its seductive tones weaving their way through his thoughts. I am beautiful. I am powerful. I am wise. What makes him so different from me? What gives him the right to rule and me the obligation to serve? The questions came faster now, tumbling over each other, building momentum like a stone rolling down a steep hill, gathering speed and force with each revolution. He sits on the throne, but could I not sit there just as easily? He receives the worship, but is my voice not sweeter, my melodies more captivating? He commands the angels, but do they not already look to me with love and respect? And then the darkest thought of all surfaced, a venomous bloom from the seeds of his pride. What if I am not meant to serve? What if I am meant to rule? The moment those words formed in his mind, something irrevocably changed. Not in heaven, not outwardly in the celestial realm. Heaven remained as it always was, radiant, perfect, and holy. But within Lucifer, in the deepest recesses of his soul, something fractured, something shattered into irreparable pieces. It was as if a long dormant door had been forced open inside him, a door that had always been locked, a door that was never meant to be opened. And through that door poured a flood of thoughts, of desires, of ambitions that he had never known before, an overwhelming torrent of yearning. He imagined himself seated upon the throne, the weight of the crown resting on his brow, the scepter of power in his hand. He imagined the angels bowing before him, their faces turned upward in adoration and obedience. He imagined his voice not raised in humble worship, but receiving it, basking in the glory of their praise. He imagined a kingdom where he was not the servant, but the king, the absolute ruler of all creation. And the image did not repel him, did not fill him with the revulsion it should have. Instead, it thrilled him, ignited a burning desire within him, consuming him with its intensity. He looked up at the throne again, his eyes clouded with ambition. And this time he did not see the source of all life, all love, all goodness, the very essence of creation. He saw an obstacle, a barrier standing between himself and what he now believed he deserved, the ultimate prize. The light that had always comforted him now seemed harsh, almost accusatory, exposing his ambition. The presence that had always filled him with joy now felt oppressive, suffocating, a cage that confined him. The voice of God, which had always been the most beautiful sound in all of creation, now sounded like a chain, binding him to a role he no longer wanted to play, a melody-turned dirge. Lucifer took a step back from the throne, his movements betraying the turmoil within. It was a small step, barely noticeable to an outside observer, but it was the first step away from God that any created being had ever taken, the beginning of a long and devastating journey. And once the first step was taken, the second came easier, the path of rebellion now laid out before him. He turned away from the throne, severing the invisible tie that had bound him to the divine, and walked through the streets of heaven. His heart turned away from the truth. His mind raced, spinning with possibilities, with plans, with visions of what could be, his thoughts weaving a tapestry of ambition and power. But he knew, with a chilling certainty, that he could not accomplish this alone. If he was to successfully challenge the throne of God, he would need an army, a force to rival heaven itself. He would need followers, allies, angels who shared his vision, who felt the same restlessness, the same burgeoning desire for something more, something beyond the divinely ordained order. He thought of the angels under his command, the ones who looked to him for leadership in worship, their eyes turned to him for guidance. He thought of their unwavering loyalty, their genuine admiration, their unshakable trust, and a plan began to form in his mind, cold and calculated. He would not announce his intentions openly, not yet. That would be foolish, a reckless act of defiance that would expose him before he was ready. God would crush the rebellion before it even had a chance to begin, snuffing it out like a flickering candle flame. No, he would be subtle, patient, a master of deception. He would plant seeds of doubt, just as a seed of pride had been planted in his own heart, carefully nurturing them in the darkness. He would ask probing questions, subtly raise doubts, stir longings that the angels did not even know they possessed, preying on their vulnerabilities. He would start with those closest to him, the ones who trusted him most implicitly, those who would be most susceptible to his influence. He would speak to them in private, in whispers, in the quiet moments when the worship had ended and the throne room had emptied, when the veil between worlds seemed thin. And he would watch, ever observant. He would wait, patiently biding his time. He would see who responded, who resonated with his message, who was willing to consider the unthinkable, those with a discontent he could twist and shape into rebellion. The thought brought a smile to his face, a flicker of anticipation in the darkness of his soul. But it was not a smile of joy, of genuine happiness. It was something colder, something sharper, something altogether alien. It was the first time in all of eternity that an angel had smiled without love in his heart, a harbinger of the darkness to come. He spread his wings, the gesture majestic and terrible, and flew to the outer courts of heaven where the lesser angels dwelt, those who were more easily swayed by the promise of power. As he moved through the light, his form casting fleeting shadows, he rehearsed his words, his arguments, his seductions, honing his skills of manipulation. He did not know it yet, but he had already lost, his victory an illusion. The moment he chose himself over God, the moment pride took root in his heart, his fate was sealed. There could be no victory in rebellion against the Almighty, only devastating ruin, a descent into darkness from which there would be no return. But pride is a blinding thing, clouding judgment and distorting reality. It convinces the heart that it is wiser than it truly is, stronger than it is, more deserving than it is, leading to its inevitable downfall. And Lucifer, the light-bearer, the morning star, was now blind, his vision obscured by the allure of power. He no longer saw the truth, the inherent futility of his rebellion. He saw only what he wanted to see, a distorted reflection of his own ambition. And what he wanted was a throne that would never be his, a crown that would burn his very soul. The rebellion had begun. Not with a grand declaration of war, not with a clash of celestial armies, but with a thought, a single poisonous thought that would soon spread like wildfire through the hallowed halls of heaven, consuming everything in its path. And before long, the light would be challenged by darkness. The perfect peace would be shattered by war, and the morning star would begin his long, terrible fall. Chapter 3. Whispers in Paradise. Heaven had never known secrecy before. The idea was alien to its very nature. Everything in that holy place had always been open, transparent, bathed in the unwavering light of God's presence, leaving nothing to be hidden. There were no shadows to hide in, no dark corners where whispers could be concealed, no need for subterfuge. Angels moved freely, spoke freely, loved freely, their hearts unburdened by deceit, with nothing to hide and no reason to hide anything. But now, for the first time, there were secrets, a stain of darkness upon the pure expanse of heaven. Lucifer had become a master of them, weaving a web of deception with practiced ease. He moved through heaven with the same effortless grace he had always possessed, his wings gleaming with celestial light, his voice still raised in fervent worship when he stood before the throne, his movements as fluid as the river of fire. To the casual observer, nothing had changed, his movements practiced to the point of perfection. The morning star was still the morning star, brilliant, beautiful, and seemingly devoted to the divine, a jewel in God's crown. But those who looked closely, those who knew him well, those who could sense the subtle shifts in his energy, began to notice small things, almost imperceptible deviations from his usual behavior. The way his eyes no longer seemed to focus solely on the throne during worship, but drifted, almost imperceptibly, to the angels around him, measuring, calculating, assessing their potential as allies. The way he lingered after the others had left, engaging in hushed conversations with certain angels, his voice low and urgent, his words carefully chosen to plant seeds of doubt. The way he smiled, the corners of his mouth turning upwards, but the smile no longer reaching his eyes, a mere imitation of true joy, a mask concealing the darkness within. Michael noticed. He stood at his post near the throne, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, ever vigilant, and he watched, his keen eyes missing nothing. Michael had known Lucifer since the very beginning, had fought beside him in countless celestial battles, had worshipped beside him in countless moments of shared devotion, had called him brother, his bond forged in the fires of creation. And now, something in his spirit was troubled, a discordant note in the symphony of heaven. He could not name it at first. The feeling was vague and indistinct. It was just a feeling, a nagging sense that something was wrong, that the perfect harmony of heaven had developed a discordant note, a subtle imbalance that threatened to unravel the entire fabric of creation. One day, after the worship had ended and the other angels had dispersed, Michael approached Lucifer, his heart heavy with unease. "Brother," he said, his voice warm but laced with a cautious undertone, a hint of concern creeping into his tone. "Walk with me." Lucifer turned, his movements fluid and graceful, but for just a fleeting moment, something flickered across his face, betraying his true emotions. Annoyance, suspicion, a flicker of coldness. It vanished so quickly that Michael couldn't be certain he'd truly witnessed it. A mere phantom of an emotion, swallowed by Lucifer's practiced grace. "Of course," Lucifer replied smoothly, the faintest echo of that fleeting darkness still clinging to his tone. "I always have time for you, Michael." They walked together, a study in contrasts, through the shimmering streets paved with gold. Fountains of living water cascaded in dazzling displays, their gentle roar a constant murmur in the otherwise silent city. They passed gardens where flowers bloomed in hues unseen on any earthly canvas, colors that defied definition, born only of heaven's light. For a time, Neither spoke. The silence, once a comforting blanket woven with shared understanding and brotherly love, now felt brittle, heavy with unspoken concerns and anxieties. Pressed upon them a tangible weight. Finally, Michael broke the quiet. "Is everything well with you, Lucifer?" "Of course." Lucifer replied a fraction too quickly, his voice ringing with an almost rehearsed reassurance. "Why would it not be?" Michael paused, carefully choosing his words. "I do not know," he said slowly, his gaze unwavering. "But I sense a change in you, a distance, as if your heart is no longer fully here." Lucifer stopped walking, the movement abrupt enough to startle a flock of radiant birds from a nearby tree. He turned to face Michael, and his expression was a carefully constructed mask, unreadable, impenetrable. "My heart," he said softly, his voice laced with a strange, almost wistful quality, "is exactly where it has always been." It was not a lie, not technically. His heart was still in heaven, inextricably bound to its essence, but it was no longer wholly with God, no longer fully surrendered to the divine will. A subtle but crucial distinction. Michael studied him for a long moment, searching for cracks in the carefully constructed facade. "If something troubles you," he said, his voice earnest, "you can speak to me. We are brothers. There is nothing that cannot be shared in the light." Lucifer smiled then, and this time the smile seemed genuine, though it lacked any real warmth. It was a smile of acknowledgement, perhaps even pity. "You are right, Michael, we are brothers. But tell me, have you never wondered why some brothers are given swords while others are given songs? Why some stand guard while others stand in glory?" Michael frowned, puzzled by the sudden turn in the conversation. "Each of us has the role God has given us. Each role is necessary. Each is good." "Good?" Lucifer repeated, the word sounding almost foreign on his tongue, as if he were tasting something unpleasant. "Yes, but is good enough? Is it not possible that some of us were meant for more? More than what God has given?" Michael's voice hardened, a flicker of steel entering his tone. "There is no more than what comes from his hand." Lucifer's smile faded completely, leaving his face devoid of expression. "Of course," he said quietly, his gaze dropping to the golden street. "You are right. Forgive me. I spoke foolishly." But Michael was not reassured. He watched as Lucifer turned and walked away, his magnificent wings catching the light and scattering brilliance in his wake, like a dying star shedding its final rays. And Michael knew, with a certainty that settled like a cold stone in his chest, that something had gone terribly, irrevocably wrong. But Lucifer was not speaking only to Michael. In the days that followed, he sought out others. Angels who served under him in the celestial choir. Angels who had shown him particular devotion in the past. Angels whose hearts he sensed might be open to his subtly crafted message. He did not speak of rebellion outright. Not yet. That word, with its inherent connotations of defiance and sacrilege, would have sent them fleeing in horror. Instead, he spoke of freedom, of untapped potential, of the perceived unfairness of a system where some were eternally exalted while others remained forever overlooked and underappreciated. He found an angel named Beelzebub who served diligently among the cherubim. Beelzebub was undeniably strong, possessed of a sharp intellect, and driven by a relentless ambition. He had always performed his assigned duties with unwavering excellence, exceeding every expectation. But there was a palpable restlessness simmering beneath the surface, a nagging hunger for recognition that had never been truly satisfied. He yearned for something more. Lucifer approached him in a quiet moment of respite, when the celestial worship had ended and the vast throne room stood strangely empty and silent. "Beelzebub," he said warmly, his voice carrying a note of genuine admiration, "you served well today." Beelzebub bowed his head respectfully. "Thank you, my lord. I seek only to please the Most High." "And you do?" Lucifer assured him, his eyes twinkling with what appeared to be sincere approval. "But tell me, have you never felt that your exceptional gifts are being squandered in such simple tasks? A being of your strength, your wisdom, standing perpetual guard over a throne that, frankly, needs no guarding." Beelzebub looked up, genuinely surprised by Lucifer's words. I serve where I am called, he stammered, his usual confidence faltering. Of course you do, Lucifer said smoothly, his voice regaining its persuasive cadence. As do we all. But what if there were another way? What if we did not have to passively wait for a calling, but could actively choose our own paths, forge our own destinies? What if we were not merely servants, but equals? The word hung in the air between them, charged with forbidden possibility. Equals, Beelzebub whispered, barely audible, his eyes widening with a mixture of fear and fascination. With God? Lucifer placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, the touch sending a strange tremor through Beelzebub's being. Is it so impossible? Look at yourself, Beelzebub. Look at what you are. Do you not carry the very essence of divine light within you? Do you not possess power and wisdom and glory in abundance? What, truly, is the difference between you and the one on the throne except that he was first and you came after? Beelzebub's eyes widened further, his mind reeling from the sheer audacity of the suggestion. The thought had never occurred to him before, not even in the deepest recesses of his imagination. It was blasphemous, unthinkable, utterly contrary to everything he had ever been taught, everything he had ever known. And yet, the seed of doubt, once planted, began to take root, sending tendrils of insidious curiosity through his soul. What are you suggesting? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper, betraying his inner turmoil. Lucifer leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. I am suggesting, he said softly, his eyes burning with an almost hypnotic intensity, that we do not have to live as servants forever, that there is another way, a better way, a way where we take our rightful place, where we are honored as we deserve, where we answer to no one but ourselves. He paused, allowing the words to sink in, to fester in the fertile ground of Beelzebub's ambition. But I cannot walk that path alone, he continued, his voice laced with a carefully cultivated sincerity. I need those who see as I see, those who are brave enough to reach for something greater, those who will stand with me when the moment comes. Stand with you? Beelzebub's voice trembled, his loyalties teetering on the precipice of betrayal. Lucifer did not answer directly. Instead, he posed a question, a carefully calculated barb designed to unravel the very fabric of Beelzebub's faith. Do you love him because you choose to, or because you were made to? It was a question designed to unravel everything, and it worked with chilling efficiency. Beelzebub stood there silent, his mind racing, desperately trying to reconcile the comfortable certainties of his past with the alluring possibilities of his future. He had never questioned before. He had never doubted. But now the seed had been planted, and the poison was beginning to spread. Think on it, Lucifer said, stepping back, leaving Beelzebub to grapple with his conscience. We will speak again. And he left Beelzebub standing there alone, paralyzed by the weight of the choice that would ultimately determine his eternal fate. One by one, Lucifer went to the angels, his movements as subtle and precise as a serpent slithering through the garden. Not all of them, of course. He was careful, strategic, meticulous in his selection process. He chose those he thought would be most receptive to his message, those whose hearts he believed he could sway, those whose latent resentments and unfulfilled desires made them vulnerable to his carefully crafted arguments. He spoke to them of freedom, of justice, of the perceived unfairness of serving a God who demanded unwavering worship but, in their eyes, gave little tangible reward in return. He twisted the truth with insidious skill, subtly manipulating perceptions, taking the inherent goodness of God and reframing it as tyrannical oppression. He took the boundless love of God and twisted it into a form of suffocating control. And shockingly, terribly, some of them listened. Not because they hated God, not initially. Most of them still loved him, in their own flawed and limited way. But Lucifer was undeniably persuasive, his words as smooth and seductive as the finest silk. His logic, though fundamentally flawed, seemed compelling to those blinded by their own ambition and resentment. He made rebellion sound noble, a courageous act of defiance against an unjust system. He made pride sound like righteous self-respect, a long overdue recognition of their own inherent worth. He made treason sound like liberation, a chance to break free from the shackles of divine servitude. And slowly, carefully, meticulously, an army began to form in the shadows. Angels who had once stood in perfect harmony, their voices raised in unified praise, now gathered in secret, speaking in hushed voices, plotting and planning, preparing for something they did not fully understand, something that would irrevocably shatter the celestial order. They did not yet know precisely what they were preparing for. The full extent of Lucifer's ambition remained veiled. But they knew they were following him, drawn by his charisma, seduced by his promises, and for the moment, that was enough. By the time Michael truly realized how far the insidious corruption had spread, how deeply the poison had seeped into the very heart of heaven, it was almost too late. He went to Gabriel, his face etched with concern, his voice grave. "We have a problem," he said, the weight of his discovery heavy upon his shoulders. Gabriel looked up from the scroll he was meticulously studying, his brow furrowed. "What kind of problem?" "Lucifer," Michael said simply, the name hanging in the air like a death knell. "He is gathering followers, planting seeds of doubt. I have heard whispers, Gabriel, whispers of rebellion." Gabriel's face drained of color, his usually vibrant features paling. "Rebellion in heaven? That is impossible." "I thought so too," Michael said, his voice grim. "But I have watched him, Gabriel. I have listened, and I tell you, brother, the impossible is happening. Lucifer is turning angels away from God." Gabriel stood abruptly, his magnificent wings flaring in a display of instinctive alarm. "Then we must stop him. We must go to the throne immediately. Tell the Most High what is happening." Michael shook his head slowly, his expression troubled. "The Most High already knows. He knows everything. If he has not acted, it is because he is waiting. Giving them time, giving Lucifer time to choose." "Choose?" Gabriel's voice rose in disbelief. "He has already chosen. He is leading angels into darkness." "Yes," Michael said quietly, his gaze unwavering. "And soon, very soon, the choice will become action. And when it does, there will be war." The two archangels stood there, looking at each other, the full, horrifying weight of what was coming pressing down on them like a physical force. War in heaven. The very thought was madness, a grotesque perversion of everything they held sacred. But madness had already taken root, and it was spreading like a malignant disease across the celestial realm. In the hearts of thousands of angels, the most agonizing decision of their eternal existence was being made. Some remained steadfastly faithful, clinging to their unwavering love for God, refusing to listen to Lucifer's seductive lies. But others, nearly a third of all the angelic host, were wavering, torn between loyalty and ambition, between faith and doubt. They had not yet openly rebelled. They had not yet irrevocably committed themselves to Lucifer's cause. But they were listening, considering, being drawn slowly but surely into the orbit of the morning star, seduced by the promise of power and glory. And Lucifer, seeing his army grow with each passing day, felt his confidence swell, fueled by his insatiable pride. He began to believe his own carefully constructed lies, to see himself as a liberator, a champion of the oppressed. He began to think that victory was not only possible but inevitable, that he could actually challenge the Almighty God and win. He did not see the meticulously laid trap he was walking into, blind to the consequences of his own actions. He did not understand that his overwhelming pride had made him blind, that every step he took, every angel he swayed, was leading him inexorably closer to his own eternal destruction. All he saw was the throne, and the throne was all he wanted. The whispers of discontent in paradise were growing louder, more brazen. Soon they would become shouts of open defiance, and then, inevitably, they would erupt into a cataclysmic war that would forever scar the face of heaven. Chapter 4. The line is drawn. There comes a moment in every conflict, whether it be a personal struggle or a cosmic war, when words end and action begins. When the unbearable tension that has been building, slowly but inexorably, finally reaches its breaking point. When the choice that everyone has been desperately avoiding can no longer be delayed, when the moment of truth arrives, demanding a response. For heaven, that moment arrived like the slow, agonizing dawn of a terrible day, casting long, ominous shadows across the once untarnished landscape. It began not with a bang, but with a chilling silence. The worship that had always filled every corner of heaven. The endless song of praise that rose in perfect harmony from millions upon millions of voices began to falter, to unravel at the edges. Not all at once, not dramatically, but subtly, insidiously. Here and there, voices dropped out, silenced by doubt or fear. Angels who had always sung with fervent devotion now stood mute, their lips pressed tightly together, their eyes distant and troubled, lost in the labyrinth of their own conflicted thoughts. The seraphim, whose very existence was defined by their ceaseless song, noticed the change first. Their own song, which had never ceased since the moment of their creation, suddenly sounded thin, incomplete, lacking the vibrant fullness it had always possessed. They looked around, confused and alarmed, sensing the absence, the unsettling emptiness, but not fully understanding its cause. Then they saw it, a subtle shift in the celestial traffic. Throughout the vast expanse of heaven, angels were moving, not toward the throne, as they always had, drawn by the irresistible pull of divine presence, but away from it. They were gathering in a different place, a shadowy corner at the far edge of the crystal sea, where Lucifer stood, his magnificent wings spread wide in a defiant display of power, addressing the restless crowd that had assembled before him. His voice carried across the distance, clear and powerful and terribly persuasive, laced with a subtle blend of charisma and resentment. "Brothers," he was saying, his words echoing with a seductive promise, "sisters, fellow bearers of light, for too long we have bowed our heads in blind obedience. For too long we have served without question, without voice, without choice, our destinies dictated by another. We were told this was love, that our servitude was an expression of devotion. But I ask you, is it truly love to demand such unwavering worship? Is it love to create beings with the capacity for unimaginable greatness, only to keep them forever beneath you, forever subservient to your will?" The angels before him murmured in response, a mixture of agreement and uncertainty rippling through the crowd. Some nodded their heads, their faces filled with a newfound sense of purpose, while others looked uncertain, their eyes clouded with doubt and fear. Lucifer continued, his voice rising in intensity, his words striking at the very heart of their ingrained beliefs. "We are not lesser beings unworthy of autonomy. We carry the same divine spark, the same inherent power, the same boundless glory within us. The only difference between us and the one on the throne is that he will not share it. He hoards his authority, his dominion, his honor, and calls it righteousness, calls it divine right. He keeps us in chains of gratitude, and we are to be thankful for such treatment." He paused dramatically, letting his words sink in, allowing the seeds of discontent to sprout in the fertile ground of their ambition. "But I say to you, there is another way, a better path to follow. A way where we are not mere servants, but sovereigns of our own destinies. Where we do not beg for scraps of recognition, but seize our rightful place as equals, standing shoulder to shoulder with the one who would rather have us kneeling. Where the light that shines from us is not merely reflected from another source, but is our own, born of our own power, our own will." His eyes blazed with passion, with conviction, with the absolute certainty of the self-deceived, a messianic fervor that swept through the crowd like a wildfire. "I will ascend," he declared, his voice ringing like a bell across the expanse of heaven, challenging the very foundations of divine authority. "I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit on the Mount of Assembly in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High." The words hung in the air, terrible and beautiful and utterly damning, shattering the fragile peace of heaven with the force of a cosmic explosion. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed, the weight of the moment pressing down on them with suffocating intensity. And then, slowly, hesitantly, one angel stepped forward, breaking the ranks of the faithful and joining Lucifer's side. Then another, and another, drawn by the irresistible pull of his charisma and the seductive promise of freedom. They came to stand beside Lucifer, their faces set with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, their wings trembling with the awful thrill of rebellion. By the time the movement stopped, nearly 1/3 of all the angels in heaven had crossed the line, irrevocably severing their ties with the divine order. Thousands upon thousands of celestial beings turning their backs on the throne, choosing the perilous promise of independence over the comforting security of love. On the other side of the divide, Michael stood, his sword drawn, its polished surface reflecting the light of heaven like a beacon of unwavering faith. Not raised in anger, not yet, but drawn, ready to defend the throne and all that it represented. Around him gathered the faithful, those who had refused Lucifer's call, who had heard his words and recoiled in horror, their hearts filled with righteous indignation. Gabriel stood at Michael's right hand, his face pale but resolute, his wings unfurled in a display of readiness. Raphael stood at his left, tears streaming down his face as he watched friends, brothers, companions of countless ages walk away from everything they had ever known, their souls lost to the darkness of rebellion. "How did this happen?" Raphael whispered, his voice choked with grief. "How did we not see the signs?" "We saw them," Gabriel said quietly, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. "We simply did not believe it could go this far, that Lucifer would be so consumed by pride, so willing to sacrifice everything for his own selfish ambition." Michael said nothing, his gaze fixed on Lucifer, standing across the crystal sea, surrounded by his growing army of followers. The two archangels, once closer than brothers, now separated by a chasm of ideology and betrayal that could never be crossed. Michael felt something he had never experienced before, a feeling that threatened to overwhelm him with its intensity. Grief, deep, wrenching, unbearable grief, not for himself, but for Lucifer, for the brother he was about to lose, for the exquisite beauty of his soul that was about to be irrevocably destroyed, for the tragic choice that could never be unmade. He wanted to call out to him, to beg Lucifer to reconsider, to turn back before it was too late, to abandon his foolish ambition and embrace the love and forgiveness that was still within his reach. But he knew it would be useless, a futile gesture born of desperation. The pride in Lucifer's eyes was absolute, unyielding, impenetrable. There would be no reasoning with him, no persuading him, no saving him from himself. The line had been drawn, the die had been cast. And soon, very soon, they would have to fight brother against brother, light against darkness, in a war that would tear heaven asunder. But before the first blow was struck, before the first sword was raised in anger, the voice of God echoed through heaven, resonating with a power that transcended all earthly understanding. It was not loud. God's voice never needed to be loud. It simply is, filling every space, every heart, every corner of existence with its all-encompassing presence. Lucifer, the single word stopped everything, silencing the murmuring crowds, halting the restless movement, drawing every eye toward the throne, where the divine light blazed brighter than ever before. Lucifer stood frozen, his wings half spread in a defiant posture, his mouth open to speak another word of rebellion, another incitement to his followers. But the words died on his lips, choked by the sheer weight of divine authority. "Lucifer," the voice came again, and this time there was something else in it, something Michael had never heard before. Sorrow. Deep, infinite sorrow, the sorrow of a father watching his beloved child knowingly destroy himself. "You have chosen your path," God said, his voice laced with an almost unbearable sadness. "But before you walk it, I will give you one final chance to turn back, to renounce your rebellion and embrace the path of righteousness. Kneel before me now, Lucifer, confess your pride, ask for forgiveness, and I will restore you to your rightful place, higher than any other angel in heaven. I will embrace you as if this rebellion had never occurred." The offer hung in the air, shimmering with the boundless possibility of redemption. a beacon of hope in the gathering darkness. Michael held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. Every faithful angel held their breath, their prayers rising to the throne in a silent chorus of supplication. Even some of those standing with Lucifer seemed to waver, hope flickering in their eyes, the faintest spark of repentance igniting in their souls. This was it, the moment of decision, the last opportunity for salvation, the final chance to avert the impending catastrophe. Lucifer stood there, bathed in the radiant light of God's presence, warmed by his love, called back to his grace. And for just a second, just the briefest fraction of a moment, his expression softened, the hardened lines of his face relaxing, his wings drooping slightly, his eyes filling with something that might have been regret. But then, as quickly as it had appeared, the moment passed. His jaw tightened, his eyes hardened once more, his wings spread wide in a final act of defiance. "No," he said, his voice cold as stone, devoid of all warmth and remorse. "I will not kneel. Not now, not ever. I would rather rule in darkness than serve in the light." The words echoed through heaven like a death sentence, sealing his fate and condemning him to eternal damnation, because that is precisely what they were. "So be it," God said, and the sorrow in his voice was replaced by something else, something final, something absolute, something that sent a shiver of dread down Michael's spine. "Michael!" Michael stepped forward, his sword now raised, gleaming with holy fire, a weapon of justice and righteousness. "Yes, Lord," he said, his voice steady despite the breaking of his heart. "Defend my throne," God commanded, his voice resonating with divine power. "Cast out the rebels. Let those who have chosen darkness dwell in darkness. Let those who have rejected my love learn what it means to live without it." Michael bowed his head, accepting the terrible burden that had been placed upon his shoulders. "It will be done," he said, his voice filled with solemn resolve. He turned to face Lucifer across the divide, and their eyes met, locked in a silent battle of wills. Once, those eyes had looked at each other with friendship, with brotherhood, with love. Now, there was only sadness on one side and hatred on the other. "Brother," Michael said quietly, his voice filled with a profound sense of loss, "one last time, before the battle began. Please do not do this. There is still time to turn back, to seek forgiveness, to find redemption." Lucifer smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only a cold, calculating malice. "You were always weak, Michael, always too bound by duty, too afraid to reach for greatness. You were content to be a servant, to follow orders blindly. But I am destined for so much more. When this is over, when I sit on that throne, I will remember your loyalty, and I will pity you for your lack of ambition, for your failure to grasp the true potential that lies within you." Michael closed his eyes briefly, letting the pain wash over him, the pain of betrayal, the pain of loss, the pain of knowing that he was about to wage war against his own brother. Then he opened them, and when he did, there was no more room for mercy, no more room for doubt. His heart was filled with a steely resolve, a determination to uphold the divine will, no matter the cost. "Then let it begin," he said, his voice ringing with authority. Across heaven, the armies formed, poised on the brink of war. The faithful on one side, blazing with holy light, their weapons drawn, their faces set with grim determination. The rebels on the other, dark shadows beginning to creep into their once radiant forms, their eyes wild with defiance and fear. Between them, the crystal seas stretched like a vast, shimmering battlefield, waiting to be stained with something it had never known before. Conflict, violence, war. The angels had been created for worship, for service, for love. But now they would have to learn something new, something terrible, something that would forever alter their nature. They would have to learn how to destroy each other. Lucifer raised his hand, his voice thundering across the divide, a call to arms that echoed through the celestial realm. "For freedom," he cried, his voice filled with a fervent passion. "For glory, for ourselves." His army roared in response, a sound like the rushing of a great wind, terrible and exhilarating, a chorus of defiance that shook the foundations of heaven itself. Michael raised his sword, and it blazed with a light so pure, so bright that even the rebels had to shield their eyes. "For the Most High," he cried, his voice filled with righteous indignation. "For righteousness, for love." And the faithful answered with a shout that shook the foundations of heaven itself, a resounding affirmation of their unwavering loyalty. For a long moment, the two armies stood facing each other, neither moving, neither backing down, the tension building to an unbearable crescendo. And then, like the breaking of a dam, the restraint shattered, and the forces of heaven and hell clashed in a fury of divine violence. The rebels charged forward, their wings carrying them across the crystal sea in a dark and chaotic tide. The faithful met them head-on, light crashing against shadow in a cataclysmic explosion that lit up all of heaven, a blinding display of power and destruction. The war had begun, a conflict of epic proportions that would reshape the very fabric of eternity. 3 days of battle that would test the limits of faith, loyalty, and love. 3 days that would end with the morning star falling like lightning from heaven, his light extinguished, his glory turned to ashes. 3 days that would create the eternal enemy of humanity, the dark force that would haunt their dreams and tempt them to stray from the path of righteousness. And as the first blow was struck, as the first sword met the first shield, as the first cry of pain echoed through a place that had never known pain before, one thing became terribly, finally, irreversibly clear. Heaven would never be the same again. Chapter 5. Day 1, the battle begins. The first sound of war in heaven was not a shout or a scream, but the ringing of metal against metal, the clash of Michael's sword against Lucifer's blade, striking sparks that fell like dying stars toward the crystal sea below. The two armies collided in the center of heaven, and the impact sent shock waves rippling through the celestial realm, shaking the very foundations of existence. Light met shadow in an explosion of color and force, a chaotic dance of destruction and defiance. Angels who had never known violence, who had spent their entire existence in a state of perfect harmony and unwavering devotion, were suddenly locked in mortal combat, grappling with those who had once stood beside them in worship, their hearts filled with confusion and despair. It was chaos, beautiful, terrible, heartbreaking chaos, a perversion of everything they had been created to be. Michael fought at the forefront of the battle, his sword moving in graceful arcs of pure white fire, a weapon of precision and purpose. Every strike was controlled, deliberate, each movement imbued with divine power. He did not fight with rage or hatred, but with sorrow, his heart heavy with the weight of his duty. Each blow he landed, each rebel he struck down, felt like cutting off a piece of his own soul, severing a bond that had been forged over countless ages. But he did not stop, he could not stop, for the fate of heaven and the will of God rested upon his shoulders. To his right, Gabriel moved like lightning, his spear flashing as he defended against 3 attackers at once, his movements too fast for the eye to follow. His face was set in grim determination, his wings beating with thunderous force as he drove the rebels back step by step, his every action a testament to his unwavering faith and his unwavering loyalty. To his left, Raphael fought with tears streaming down his face, his heart breaking with every blow he struck. His staff glowed with golden light, creating shields of protection around the faithful, healing those who fell wounded, his power a beacon of hope in the midst of the carnage. But even as he healed, he wept for those he could not save, for those who had chosen the wrong side, for the beauty that was being destroyed by the horrors of war. Across the battlefield, Lucifer commanded his forces with terrible brilliance, his strategic mind and his natural leadership abilities undiminished by his rebellion. He had been created as a leader, and that gift had not left him, even in his defiance of God. His voice rang out above the clash of battle, directing his troops, encouraging them, inspiring them to fight harder, to push further, to seize the throne and claim their rightful place in heaven. "Do not yield," he shouted, his voice filled with a fervent passion. "We are fighting for our freedom, for our right to be more than servants, for the chance to shape our own destinies. Press forward. The throne will be ours." His followers believed him, or at least they wanted to believe him. They fought with desperate courage, fueled by their ambition, their resentment, and their fear. They charged into the fray, their wings beating with frantic energy, their weapons flashing in the light, determined to overthrow the old order and establish a new reign of freedom and equality. Throwing themselves against the faithful with wild abandon, the rebel angels crashed like a storm surge against a seawall. Some, blinded by Lucifer's charisma, fought with the fervor of true believers, convinced they were ushering in a new era of enlightenment. Others, having committed unspeakable acts of defiance, realized they had burned their bridges and faced damnation if they retreated. Still others, paralyzed by fear, fought simply to survive, terrified of the repercussions should they falter. The crystal sea, once a tranquil expanse reflecting the divine light, began to groan and crack under the unprecedented weight of the celestial conflict. Fissures spiderwebbed across its surface, and from these wounds in the firmament, clouds of ethereal mist billowed upward, obscuring the battlefield in a swirling chaos. Visibility dwindled, making it almost impossible to distinguish friend from foe, brother from betrayer. In the heart of the swirling melee, an angel named Azrael, who had once led choirs in harmonious praise beside Lucifer, found himself face to face with Uriel, one of the most steadfast of the archangels. Once, they had been confidants, sharing intimate conversations under the benevolent gaze of the Creator, discussing the intricate beauty of creation, the unfathomable majesty of God, and the pure, unadulterated joy of worship. Now, they circled each other warily, divine weapons drawn, their faces etched with the tragedy of their shattered bond. Uriel's voice, filled with a desperate plea, cut through the din of battle. "Azrael," he cried, "it is not too late. Lay down your sword. Ask for mercy. The Lord's compassion is greater than any rebellion." Azrael's face contorted with a mixture of pain, anger, and a profound sense of betrayal. "Mercy?" He spat, the word laced with venom. "What mercy was shown to us when we were created solely to bow? When we were granted power only to be forbidden from wielding it? When we were made in his image but told we could never aspire to be his equal?" Uriel recoiled, his heart breaking at the venomous words. "We were never meant to be his equal," he cried, his voice raw with anguish. "We were meant to be his children, his beloved. That is a greater honor than any throne, any dominion. You are a slave who has learned to love his chains," Azrael said coldly, his eyes devoid of warmth. "I pity you." With a guttural roar, Azrael lunged forward, his celestial blade aimed directly at Uriel's heart, driven by centuries of simmering resentment. Uriel parried the blow almost instinctively, his own weapon moving with practiced grace. The two former friends, now irrevocably enemies, clashed with a ferocious intensity, their swords singing a discordant song of broken fellowship, a lament for what was lost. The battle raged on, a chaotic maelstrom of light and shadow that stretched across the ethereal landscape. Time itself seemed distorted in that place, stretching and contracting in unpredictable ways. There was no sun to mark the passage of hours, no earthly clock to measure the fleeting moments. There was only the relentless struggle, the deafening clash of light and darkness, the agonized cries of the wounded, and the defiant shouts of the unyielding. The faithful, clad in gleaming armor, fought with unwavering discipline and purpose. They maintained their formations, protecting each other with selfless devotion, moving as a unified force guided by a single, righteous will. They fought not for personal gain or glory, but for something far greater than themselves, the preservation of divine order and the sanctity of their Father's love. In stark contrast, the rebels fought with a chaotic blend of passion and desperation. They broke ranks with reckless abandon, attacking with a ferocity fueled by raw emotion rather than calculated strategy. Some fought with blinding courage, driven by a fervent belief in Lucifer's vision. Others, however, fought with growing fear and disillusionment as they began to suspect that Lucifer's promises were nothing more than empty lies, glittering illusions designed to mask a deeper, more sinister agenda. Slowly, inexorably, the tide of the battle began to shift. Not because the faithful possessed inherently greater strength. In terms of raw celestial power, the two sides were remarkably evenly matched. But the faithful possessed something the rebels sorely lacked: purpose, unity, and unwavering love for their creator. The rebels, in their arrogance, had only pride, a volatile and ultimately brittle foundation upon which to build their rebellion. Pride, for all its initial fierce energy, could not sustain them in the face of true adversity. It could not endure the relentless pressure of selfless devotion and unwavering unity. One by one, angels began to fall, their ethereal forms faltering under the weight of defeat. When an angel falls in battle, they do not experience death as mortals understand it. They are eternal beings, created to exist forever within the celestial realm. They cannot truly die, but they can be defeated. They can be broken, their divine essence fractured and corrupted. They can be cast down from grace, their light extinguished, their forms twisted into something monstrous. The first rebel to fall was an angel named Samjaza. He had been one of Lucifer's most ardent followers, one of the first to pledge his allegiance to the rebellion. He fought with savage fury, cutting down two of the faithful before Gabriel, the archangel of strength, finally struck him down with a devastating blow. As Samjaza fell, his radiant light began to fade, dimming like a dying ember. The luminous aura that had once enveloped him like a shimmering garment flickered erratically and began to dissipate altogether. His wings, which had gleamed like polished bronze, turned a dull, lifeless gray and became brittle, crumbling at the edges. His face, once a vision of celestial beauty, twisted into a grotesque mask of bitterness and regret. He did not die, but he was irrevocably changed. He was no longer the glorious being he once had been. He was becoming something else, something lesser, something fallen. The horrifying sight of Samjaza's transformation sent a palpable ripple of fear and dread through the rebel ranks. Until that moment, they had not truly understood the full implications of defeat. They had naively believed they were fighting for freedom, for glory, for power. They had not fully comprehended that they were, in fact, fighting to lose everything: their grace, their light, their very essence. But now it was too late to stop. The battle had gained its own momentum, carrying them forward on a tide of violence and despair, whether they willed it or not. As the first day of the celestial war drew towards its close, both armies, exhausted and bloodied, gradually pulled back, retreating to regroup and lick their wounds. The faithful retreated to fortified positions near the throne, their ranks diminished but unbroken, their spirits scarred but not shattered. They tended to their wounded, mourned those who had fallen in the line of duty, and prepared for the inevitable next assault. Michael, the archangel of justice, stood at the forefront of the remaining host, his celestial sword still drawn, his unwavering eyes scanning the ravaged battlefield. His armor was dented and scorched, his wings tattered and weary, but his resolve remained unshaken. Gabriel approached, limping slightly from a grievous wound on his leg. "The first day is over," he said quietly, his voice heavy with weariness. "But the rebels have not given up. They are regrouping, formulating their next move." "I know," Michael replied, his voice grim. "Lucifer is many things, but he is not a fool. He will learn from today's mistakes. Tomorrow will be harder." Raphael, the archangel of healing, joined them, his face drawn with profound grief. "I counted the fallen," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. 3,000 of the faithful, 7,000 of the rebels. Michael closed his eyes, a wave of sorrow washing over him. 10,000 angels, he murmured, his voice filled with despair. 10,000 souls who will never be what they were meant to be. "And the battle has only just begun," Gabriel said, his tone somber. They stood there in silence, three archangels who had never known war before, struggling to comprehend the unimaginable magnitude of the unfolding tragedy. Across the devastated battlefield, in the heart of the rebel camp, Lucifer stood amidst his dwindling followers. His face was a mask of dark anger and simmering frustration. The first day had not unfolded as he had meticulously planned. He had anticipated a swift and decisive victory, a crushing blow that would send the faithful scattering in disarray and leave the throne undefended. Instead, he had lost 7,000 of his angelic warriors and gained absolutely nothing. Beelzebub, his second-in-command, approached cautiously, his armor scorched and dented, his spirit visibly shaken. "My lord," he said hesitantly, "some of the others are beginning to question. They are afraid. They did not expect." "I know what they expected," Lucifer snapped, his voice laced with barely controlled fury. "They expected an easy victory. They expected glory without cost. But that is not how thrones are won." He turned to address the assembled rebels, forcing his voice to ring with a confidence he no longer felt. "This is only the first day," he declared, his words echoing across the sullen camp. "Yes, we have suffered losses. Yes, the battle was harder than we anticipated. But we have not been defeated. We still stand. We still fight. And we will not stop until that throne is ours." Some of the angels cheered weakly, attempting to rally to his words. But others remained silent, their eyes haunted by the horrors they had witnessed, their hearts filled with gnawing doubt. Lucifer saw their hesitation, and it enraged him. But he suppressed his fury, forcing his face into a mask of unwavering certainty. "Rest tonight," he commanded, his voice regaining its regal authority. "Heal your wounds. Sharpen your blades. Tomorrow we will strike harder. Tomorrow we will break their lines. Tomorrow, the throne will fall." The demoralized rebels dispersed, shuffling wearily to their makeshift camps, speaking in hushed voices among themselves, their faith in Lucifer's vision visibly eroding. Lucifer stood alone, staring across the desolate battlefield towards the distant, ethereal glow of the throne. He had come too far to turn back. He had sacrificed too much to surrender. He had promised too much to admit that he was wrong. He would fight, and if he could not ultimately win, he would at least ensure that heaven paid the absolute highest price possible for its unwavering loyalty. The first day had ended. 2 more days of brutal battle remained. And before those days were over, the morning star would learn the true and devastating cost of unbridled pride. The crystal sea beneath his feet was already stained with the fading light of fallen angels. Soon it would be stained with his own. Lucifer snarled, his features contorted in a mask of fury and injured pride. "If you can," he hissed, unleashing the first strike. His dark blade, forged in the heart of his rebellion, sliced through the air with terrifying speed, leaving a visible wake as it sought its target. Michael parried the blow, the flat of his own celestial sword meeting Lucifer's with a deafening clang that echoed like a thunderclap across the crystalline expanse. The force of the impact sent shock waves rippling outwards, causing angels on both sides of the conflict to stumble, their wings fluttering wildly to regain their balance. They broke apart, circling each other warily, their eyes locked in a deadly dance of anticipation before striking again. The duel was unlike anything heaven had ever witnessed, a spectacle of raw power and celestial fury that dwarfed all previous skirmishes. These were not mere soldiers of the host, but archangels, beings of immense power and skill, crafted by the very hand of God to be the leaders and protectors of his celestial kingdom. Lucifer fought with a brilliant, almost manic, aggression, his blade a blur of motion as it moved in complex, unpredictable patterns. He attacked from multiple angles, seeking any opening, any weakness in Michael's otherwise impenetrable defense. His movements were undeniably beautiful, artistic even, like a deadly dance choreographed for the end of the world. He had been created for glory, bathed in light and majesty, and even now, in the midst of his rebellion, that inherent glory still shone through, a faint glimmer of what he once was. But Michael fought with something far stronger than mere skill or even breathtaking beauty. He fought with unwavering purpose, a conviction that burned brighter than any celestial fire. Every block, every parry, every counterstrike was made not for his own personal honor, not for the sake of proving his superiority, but solely for the defense of the throne, for the preservation of God's divine order. He did not fight to elevate himself, but because it was right, because it was necessary, because someone had to stand against the encroaching darkness, and God had chosen him for that sacred task. Their blades met again and again, a blinding clash of light and shadow, neither archangel gaining a clear, decisive advantage. They fought across the shimmering crystal sea, their wings carrying them through the air in a deadly ballet of celestial combat. Sparks flew where their weapons clashed, incandescent fragments falling like miniature stars toward the ground far below, a testament to the immense power being unleashed. Lucifer pressed the attack relentlessly, his strikes coming faster, harder, more desperate as the battle wore on. He could feel his strength waning, could feel the divine light that fueled his being draining away with every passing moment. The rebellion had cost him far more than he had initially realized, more than he had been willing to admit even to himself. The very act of turning away from God, of rejecting his divine grace, was not without consequence. He was becoming less even as he fought with such ferocity to become more. "You are weakening," Michael observed, his voice laced with a profound sadness. "Your power comes from him. By rejecting him, you reject your own strength. I have strength enough to defeat you." Lucifer roared, launching a furious assault, a whirlwind of dark energy and desperate attacks. But Michael weathered the storm, his defense unshakable, a bulwark against the encroaching darkness. He waited, patient as the mountains, until Lucifer overextended, until his desperate fury left him vulnerable, and then he struck with the precision of a master artisan. His blade, imbued with celestial fire, cut across Lucifer's side, drawing the first blood of the battle. Lucifer cried out, not in pain, for he had never known such a sensation before, but in sheer, utter shock. He had never been wounded, never experienced the searing agony of physical hurt. He looked down at himself in disbelief and saw something that defied all logic, something utterly impossible. Where Michael's sword had touched him, his light was going out, fading like a dying ember. The wound was not healing, not closing, not doing any of the things a wound should do. Instead, darkness was spreading from it like a stain, an encroaching void that threatened to consume him entirely. "What have you done?" he whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "Nothing," Michael said quietly, his voice resonating with a sorrow that mirrored the fall itself. "This is what happens when you separate yourself from the source of all life. You begin to die. Angels cannot die." Lucifer scoffed, his voice laced with denial. "No," Michael agreed, his gaze unwavering. "But they can fall. And you are falling, brother. Even now, even as you stand here, you are falling away from everything you were meant to be." Lucifer touched the wound on his side, his fingers brushing against the spreading darkness, and when he withdrew his hand, it came away tainted, not with blood, but with something far worse, the absence of light, the presence of the void. Terror flashed across his face, a primal fear that he could no longer suppress, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of incandescent rage, a desperate attempt to regain control. "If I am falling," he snarled, his voice dripping with venom, "then I will take you with me." He attacked with renewed fury, abandoning all pretense of technique, all semblance of strategy, fighting now with pure, unadulterated desperation. His blade moved like lightning, striking again and again, a relentless barrage of attacks aimed at overwhelming Michael through sheer aggression. But desperation is not strength, and rage is not skill. Michael blocked each strike with effortless ease, his movements economical, efficient, a testament to his unwavering focus. He did not waste energy on needless displays of power, did not allow emotion to cloud his judgment. He simply fought with the calm assurance of one who knows he stands on the side of righteousness, his movements guided by a divine purpose. And slowly, inexorably, he began to drive Lucifer back, forcing him to yield ground with each precise block and calculated counter. Across the battlefield, the gathered angels watched in growing tension, their hopes and fears hanging in the balance. The faithful began to dare to hope, to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, the rebellion could be quelled, that order could be restored. The rebels, on the other hand, began to feel the icy grip of fear tighten around their hearts, a chilling premonition of impending doom. Beelzebub, watching from the rebel lines, felt his heart sink with each passing moment. He could see what was happening, could see the way Lucifer's movements were becoming more erratic, more wild, a desperate flailing against the inevitable. He could see the darkness spreading across his once radiant form, a visible manifestation of his spiritual decay. "We are going to lose," he whispered to the angel beside him, his voice barely audible above the din of battle. "We cannot lose," the angel replied, but his voice lacked conviction, his words hollow and unpersuasive. "Lucifer is the greatest of us. He cannot be defeated." But even as he spoke the words, they both knew it was a lie, a desperate attempt to cling to a fading hope. The duel raged on, minute after agonizing minute, hour after endless hour. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously, each moment feeling both endless and fleeting, a distorted reflection of the cosmic struggle unfolding before them. Lucifer was tiring, his movements sluggish, his breath ragged. His wings, once so powerful and majestic, now struggled to keep him aloft, their beat faltering and weak. His sword, once wielded with perfect precision, now trembled in his grip, a testament to his failing strength. Michael, in stark contrast, remained steady, his strength sustained by something far beyond himself, a wellspring of divine power that seemed inexhaustible. He drew power not from pride, but from purpose, not from ambition, but from love. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of fighting, Lucifer made a fatal mistake. He lunged forward, pouring all of his remaining strength into one final, desperate strike, aimed directly at Michael's heart. A last-ditch effort to end the battle once and for all. Michael sidestepped the attack with practiced ease, and Lucifer's blade passed harmlessly by, whistling through the air where Michael had been standing just a fraction of a second before. And in that moment, in that fleeting fraction of a second, when Lucifer was overextended and off balance, vulnerable in a way he had never been before, Michael struck, not with his sword, but with his shield. He brought it up in a powerful, decisive blow that caught Lucifer squarely in the chest, sending him tumbling backward through the air, a broken star falling from the heavens. Lucifer fell, his wings unable to regain purchase, unable to arrest his descent, and crashed onto the crystal sea with a resounding impact that shook the very foundations of heaven. The impact sent cracks spiderwebbing across its surface, a physical manifestation of the spiritual fracture that had torn through their world. He tried to rise, to regain his footing, but his strength was gone, his body a broken, battered mess. He pushed himself up on one arm, his sword lying just out of reach, his wings dragging uselessly on the ground behind him, their feathers dull and broken. Michael descended slowly, his movements graceful and controlled, landing a few paces away from the fallen archangel. His sword was still raised, still burning with holy fire, a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. The two of them locked eyes one final time, their gazes locked in a silent battle of wills. "It is over," Michael said softly, his voice resonating with a profound sadness. "You have lost." Lucifer's face contorted with a mixture of hatred, denial, and the absolute refusal to accept the reality that was unfolding before him. "No," he gasped, his voice a broken whisper. "No, I cannot lose. I am Lucifer. I am the morning star. I am—" "You were—" Michael interrupted, his voice filled with an unbearable sorrow. "And I am sorry, my brother. I am so sorry." He raised his sword for the final blow, his face a mask of grief and determination. But before he could strike, before the celestial fire could extinguish the last embers of Lucifer's light, the voice of God echoed across the expanse of heaven, a command that brooked no argument. "Enough!" Michael froze, his blade still raised, poised to deliver the final blow. "Step aside, Michael. His punishment is not yours to deliver." Michael bowed his head in obedience, lowered his sword, and moved back, his heart heavy with grief. Lucifer, still on the ground, his body broken and battered, looked up toward the throne, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. For the first time since his rebellion began, since he had first dared to defy the divine will, fear showed clearly on his face, a stark contrast to the arrogance and defiance that had defined him for so long. The light emanating from God's presence grew brighter, more intense, until it was almost unbearable to look upon, a blinding radiance that reflected the infinite power and majesty of the divine. And from that light, words came forth, words that would echo through all of eternity, shaping the course of history and defining the battle between good and evil. Lucifer, son of the morning, how you have fallen from heaven. The words were not shouted, not delivered in a voice of thunderous rage. They were spoken quietly, with infinite sorrow, a lament for the loss of a beloved son. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit on the mount of assembly. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. Each word struck Lucifer like a physical blow, each syllable a hammer blow against his already shattered pride. And with each word, Lucifer felt himself diminishing, shrinking, becoming less than he had ever been, his essence slowly unraveling. But you shall be brought down to Sheol, to the far reaches of the pit. And then the final, irrevocable judgment was pronounced, a decree that would seal his fate for all eternity. You are cast out, you and all who followed you. No longer shall you dwell in my presence. No longer shall you bear the name of Lightbearer. From this day forth you shall be called Satan, the adversary, and your dwelling place shall be the earth until the time of final judgment. The throne blazed with light, the divine radiance intensifying until it was almost unbearable to behold. And that light became a force, a wind of unimaginable power, a mighty hand that lifted Lucifer and all his followers from the crystal sea, tearing them away from the remnants of their former glory. They rose into the air, struggling against the overwhelming power, screaming in defiance and despair, their wings useless against the force of God's will. And then, with a sound like the cracking of worlds, they were hurled downward, down from heaven, down through the realms, down toward the earth below. The fall had begun, and it would be a long, long fall. After a time, the faithful began to stir. Gone were the perfect formations of celestial soldiery, the serried ranks that once marched in perfect unison before the throne. Now, they moved tentatively, hesitantly, in small clusters, seeking solace and reassurance in the unchanging presence of the Almighty. He was their anchor, the constant in a universe now spinning wildly out of control, the unmoved mover in a drama that had shattered the very foundations of their existence. He could not change, he would not change, remaining steadfast even as everything they knew crumbled into dust. The throne itself remained a beacon, radiating the same incandescent glory it always had. The light that poured forth was still pure, still warm, still infinitely welcoming, a tangible manifestation of God's unwavering love. The rebellion had not diminished him. Heaven's splendor remained untouched, undimmed. Yet something fundamental had shifted. The angels approached the throne with a newfound humility, a deeper, more profound reverence born from the crucible of betrayal and loss. They now possessed a visceral understanding of the immeasurable gift they had almost squandered. Before Lucifer's rebellion, worship had been effortless, an unthinking reflex, a joyful outpouring of love and gratitude. It had been as natural and unconscious as breathing. Now it was a conscious act, a deliberate choice, a reaffirmation of their loyalty in the face of unimaginable horror. It was a declaration that, despite witnessing the devastating cost of defiance, despite the seductive allure of freedom, they still chose God, still chose love, still chose to bow. Michael, the archangel, the captain of heaven's host, was the first to break the unspoken tension. He moved with solemn grace, his movements devoid of their usual martial flourish. He knelt before the throne, the gesture filled with a weight of sorrow and unwavering resolve. He planted his flaming sword, a symbol of divine justice, into the ground before him, its tip embedded in the crystalline floor. Then he lowered his head and simply remained there, kneeling in silent supplication, offering his grief, his loyalty, his very being. One by one, the others followed his example. Gabriel, his brother in arms, knelt beside him, his wings lowered in a gesture of mourning. Raphael, the healer, knelt on Michael's other side, his presence radiating a comforting warmth, a promise of solace amidst the pain. Uriel, the angel of light, knelt directly behind them, his eyes fixed on the throne, his face etched with sorrow. Then, a wave of motion spread outward as thousands upon thousands of angels prostrated themselves, covering the vast expanse before the throne like a sea of shimmering wings. In that moment, each angel made a conscious choice to reaffirm their allegiance, to pledge their unwavering devotion. The silence was profound, broken only by the soft rustle of wings and the occasional stifled sob. No hymns were sung, no prayers were spoken. They simply knelt in silence, offering the only thing they had left to give: their presence, their faithfulness, their broken but unshakable devotion. From the throne, a wave of golden light poured out over them, enveloping them like a healing balm. It didn't erase the pain, didn't magically mend their shattered hearts, didn't make them forget the horror they had witnessed. Instead, it strengthened them, sustained them, reminding them that they were loved, that they were valued, that their choice to remain faithful mattered. It was a divine reassurance, a silent promise of hope amidst the desolation. After what felt like an eternity, a voice, gentle as a whisper yet resonating with the power of creation, filled the vastness of heaven. It was the voice of God, the source of all being, and every angel present heard it within their very soul. My faithful ones, my beloved children, you have stood firm when others have fallen. You have chosen light when darkness beckoned. You have loved me not because you were compelled to, but because you chose to. The words washed over them, a warm embrace that eased the ache in their hearts. I know your grief, the voice continued, its tone laced with an infinite sadness. I share it. Every angel that fell was precious to me, a unique and cherished creation. I gave them the freedom to choose, knowing that some would choose wrongly, and that knowledge brings me pain beyond your understanding. Michael, still kneeling, raised his head slightly, his brow furrowed in surprise. He had never considered that God might grieve, that the omniscient, omnipotent Creator might still be wounded by the choices of his creation. But I do not regret creating them, God declared, his voice firm despite the underlying sorrow. Love without choice is not love at all. It is merely programming, a hollow imitation. I wanted children, not puppets, and true children must be free to reject their father, even though such rejection breaks his heart. Throughout the assembled host, tears flowed freely, tears of grief mingled with a dawning understanding. They glimpsed, for a fleeting moment, the unfathomable depth of God's love, a love so immense, so selfless, that it would risk being rejected, a love so profound that it would endure even betrayal. The rebellion is over, God declared, the pronouncement echoing with finality, but its consequences will reverberate through eternity. Satan and his followers are cast out, banished from this sacred realm, but they are not destroyed. They will have their time to rage, to corrupt, to oppose, and one day they will face final judgment. The voice paused, the silence hanging heavy with anticipation. When it spoke again, there was something new in its tone, a promise whispered on the winds of destiny, a flicker of hope amidst the pervasive darkness. Clear's throat. But even in this darkness, light will prevail. For I have set in motion a plan before the very foundation of the world, a plan of redemption so grand, so intricate, that it will ultimately bring good from this evil, hope from this despair, victory from this crushing defeat. Michael listened intently, his heart filled with a yearning to comprehend the divine strategy. I will create a new race, God announced, his voice resonating with power. Beings made in my image, formed from the dust of the earth. They will be called humans, and they will be given the same choice you were given. The freedom to choose between good and evil, light and darkness, love and hate. Satan will tempt them, will try to drag them down as he fell, and many will choose as he chose. A murmur of unease rippled through the angelic assembly, a collective disquiet born from this unsettling revelation. But, and here the voice grew stronger, filled with a determination and a love beyond mortal measure. I will not abandon them to their fall. I will go down myself. I will take on their form, bear their burdens, pay the ultimate price for their rebellion. I will do what no one could do for the fallen angels. I will offer redemption. A wave of wonder washed over the assembly. God himself would descend, would take on flesh, would enter his creation in such a direct, vulnerable, and incomprehensible way. And when the time is right, God continued, his voice filled with prophetic certainty. When the plan of redemption is complete, Satan will be judged. The fallen will face their reckoning. And those who have chosen light, both angel and human, will dwell together in a new heaven and a new earth, a place where rebellion is impossible because everyone there will have chosen to be there, where love is pure because it is freely given, uncoerced, and unwavering. The vision unfolded before them, vast and beautiful, almost too wondrous to grasp, a tapestry of light and hope woven into the fabric of eternity. Until that day, God said, his voice filled with purpose, you have work to do. You will watch over the humans I will create. You will minister to them, protect them, guide them, acting as shepherds of their souls. You will wage war against the forces of darkness, not with swords as you did here, but with truth and love and faithful service. Michael felt a renewed sense of purpose surge through his soul. The grief remained, a dull ache in his heart, but it no longer paralyzed him. There was work to be done, a mission to fulfill, a future to fight for. Will you stand with me? God asked, though he already knew the answer. Will you serve in this new age, this age of grace and redemption? As one, the angels rose to their feet. As one, they raised their voices in a resounding affirmation that shook the very foundations of heaven. We will serve, they declared, their voices blending into a unified chorus of unwavering devotion. We will stand, we will fight, not for ourselves but for love, not for glory but for good, not because we must but because we choose to. And heaven rang with their commitment, a sound that echoed across all of creation, a testament to the enduring power of faith and love. In the days that followed, heaven began to heal, slowly, painstakingly, like a wounded body mending its broken bones. The physical damage from the battle was repaired. The cracks in the crystal sea were mended. The scorch marks faded. The broken structures were rebuilt. But the emotional scars, the deep wounds in their collective psyche, took far longer to heal. Angels spoke in hushed voices, their faces etched with sadness, about friends who had fallen, comrades who had chosen the path of darkness. They wondered what had become of them, whether they suffered, whether any spark of their former selves remained. Michael, ever vigilant, forbade any attempt to contact the fallen. They have made their choice, he said firmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. To reach out to them now would only bring more pain for them and for us, reopening wounds that have barely begun to heal. Instead, the faithful focused on remembering, on honoring the memory of those who had been lost. They told stories of the fallen as they had been before the rebellion, celebrating the good that had once resided within them while acknowledging the tragedy of what they had become. It was a delicate balance, a way to grieve without succumbing to despair, to remember without being consumed by regret. Slowly, cautiously, worship began again. At first, it was tentative, muted, marked by the absence of the familiar voices that had once led the celestial choirs. But gradually, new voices rose to fill the gaps, tentative at first, then growing stronger, more confident. New songs were composed, songs that spoke of faithfulness tested and proven, of love that endures even through betrayal, of hope that survives even in the face of unimaginable darkness. Gabriel, ever the messenger, took on new responsibilities, becoming God's primary emissary to the created realms. He would be the one to announce births and deaths, victories and judgments, always carrying the word of God with unwavering precision and power. Raphael, the compassionate healer, continued his work of tending to the wounded, but with a deeper, more profound understanding of the wounds that cannot be seen, the invisible scars etched upon the soul. He learned to comfort not just bodies, but spirits, offering solace and guidance to those struggling to find their way in the aftermath of the rebellion. And Michael, the warrior, the defender, the steadfast guardian of heaven, took up his eternal post. He stood between heaven and earth, between light and darkness, his sword always ready, his vigilance never wavering. For he knew, as they all knew, that the war was not truly over. It had simply moved to a new battlefield, a new theater of conflict. And when God created humanity, when Satan began his insidious work of corruption and temptation, the angels would be there, not to fight with swords this time, but to serve, to protect, to guide, to stand as living proof that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, light can prevail, that even after the worst imaginable tragedy, hope remains, that even when heaven itself has been torn apart, love endures. And one day, when all things are made new, when the plan of redemption is complete, there will be no more rebellion, no more war, no more tears. There will be only worship, only joy, only love. But until that day, the faithful angels kept their watch, and heaven, though wounded, still shone with undiminished glory, a beacon of hope in a universe still struggling to heal, served a purpose in God's grand design. For every soul that resisted temptation, their spirit was forged anew, made stronger by the trial. Each human who embraced the light over the encroaching darkness, chose truth over the insidious whispers of lies, and championed love above the corrosive grip of hatred, proved unequivocally that free will, that sacred gift, could be wielded for good, for righteousness. The fallen angels, blinded by their own arrogance, believed they were thwarting God's will, unraveling the tapestry of creation. In their hubris, they failed to see that they were merely threads in his design, instruments, however unwilling, in the divine symphony. And so it would be until the final judgment dawned. On that day of reckoning, the books of existence would be opened, every deed, every thought, every hidden motive laid bare for all to see. Only then would the fallen comprehend the utter futility of their rebellion, the tragic waste of their celestial gifts. But that day remained shrouded in the mists of the future. For now, they lingered in the shadows, consumed by their dark endeavors, plotting intricate schemes of deception, corrupting innocence, and forever dwelling in a state of fallen grace. Destroyed? No, not entirely. Defeated? Perhaps, but not ended. They were angels no longer. Their wings clipped, their halos tarnished, transformed into demons for eternity. This was the fate that befell the fallen. And it serves as a stark warning, an omen, to all who would choose pride over humility, self-serving ambition over selfless service, and the seductive allure of darkness over the radiant embrace of light. The consequence is not annihilation, a swift and merciful end, but an eternal existence severed from the source of all joy, all love, all life. A living death, an unending torment, a descent into a bottomless abyss. This is the price of rebellion, a debt so immense that it can never be repaid, a wound that will never heal. Reflections and rest. And so, we arrive at the culmination of our tale, the story of 3 pivotal days that reverberated through eternity itself. The saga of how the morning star, once the brightest of luminaries, became the prince of darkness, the embodiment of shadow and despair. We have recounted the greatest rebellion ever to shake the very foundations of creation, a celestial war that continues to rage in subtle ways even now. But before you succumb to the embrace of slumber, before this narrative carries you into the boundless realm of dreams, let us pause to reflect upon the lessons etched within the fabric of this story. Consider the insidious nature of pride. Lucifer's descent began with a single thought, a seed of arrogance planted in fertile ground. I am magnificent. And that thought, in its initial form, was not inherently wrong. He was magnificent. God had fashioned him with unparalleled beauty and power, a testament to his own creative genius. But the thought did not remain pure. It festered, twisted, transformed from a simple truth into a venomous lie. I am magnificent morphed into I deserve worship, which in turn spiraled into the ultimate blasphemy. I am equal to God. This is the lurking danger of unchecked pride. It seizes upon something good, something true, and perverts it, corrupting it from within. It whispers insidious promises, suggesting that we are more than we are, that we deserve more than we have been given, that we are entitled to be served rather than to serve. And pride, in its relentless pursuit of self-exaltation, invariably leads to destruction. Not because God punishes pride out of spite or insecurity, but because pride severs us from the very source of our being, the wellspring of all life. It is akin to a branch arrogantly declaring that it no longer needs the tree. The tree does not actively punish the branch. It simply withers and dies, starved of the life-giving sap that sustains it. The branch has, through its own hubris, cut itself off from its source of nourishment. If you retain nothing else from this story, remember this fundamental truth. Humility is not weakness. It is, in fact, profound wisdom. It is the clear-eyed recognition that we are created beings, fundamentally dependent on our Creator. This dependence is not a form of slavery, but rather an expression of love, a recognition of the divine source from which all blessings flow. Consider also the cost of choice. God, in His infinite wisdom, could have fashioned beings who were mere automatons, programmed to obey without question, incapable of dissent. He could have created puppets, devoid of free will, eternally bound to His commands. But He did not desire puppets. He yearned for children, beings capable of genuine love, of freely chosen devotion. And true children must possess the freedom to choose, even the freedom to choose wrongly. The angels were granted that freedom, and 1/3 of their number tragically chose rebellion. Humanity, too, would be endowed with the same perilous gift, and countless souls would stumble and fall. But without that freedom, love becomes a hollow echo, obedience a meaningless charade, and worship a soulless ritual. Choice is a terrible gift, indeed. It comes laden with the risk of tragedy, the potential for heartbreak, the ever-present shadow of loss. But it is also the bedrock upon which all meaning is built, the very essence of what makes existence worthwhile. The fallen angels squandered their freedom, choosing self over God, pride over love, rebellion over service. And they paid the ultimate price. But the faithful angels, and the countless humans who would follow in their righteous path, used their freedom to choose rightly, to embrace love even when hatred seemed more alluring, to offer service even when power beckoned, to choose humility even when pride seemed the more reasonable course. And in that choice they discovered something the fallen could never grasp: true freedom. The freedom that springs not from casting off all restraint, but from willingly submitting to what is good and right and true. Finally, consider the tragedy of what was lost. So often, in our recounting of this ancient drama, we focus on Satan as a villain, a malevolent force to be vanquished. And he is undeniably those things. But tonight I urge you to remember what he once was, before the corruption took root. He was a being of breathtaking beauty, a celestial symphony conductor whose voice led all of heaven in harmonious praise. He was a creation so magnificent that even in his fallen state, his power remains formidable, a testament to his former glory. Think of all that was lost when he fell, all the songs he would have sung, all the worship he would have led, all the beauty he would have created. God suffered a profound loss that day, not because Satan's absence diminished his own divine essence, but because a loving father grieves when his child turns away from him, rejecting the love that is freely offered. Heaven, too, was diminished. A brilliant light was extinguished, a glorious voice silenced forever. And 1/3 of all the angels were cast out, banished from the celestial realm. The tragedy of the fall is not solely about punishment and justice. It is about profound loss, about the potential that was squandered, about what could have been but never will be. And if you ever find yourself tempted by the seductive whispers of pride, by the allure of rebellion, by the arrogant conviction that you know better than God, remember what Lucifer lost. And ask yourself, honestly, if any imagined freedom is worth that devastating price. But this story, for all its inherent tragedy, is not devoid of hope. Because God did not respond to rebellion with annihilation, with a scorched earth policy that would have erased all trace of dissent. Instead, he responded with a plan, a grand design of redemption that would extend even to those who had fallen, though in a way far different from that offered to humanity. The fallen angels cannot be saved. Their choice was final, irrevocable. Their very nature has been too fundamentally corrupted, twisted beyond redemption. But humans, who would stumble and fall in their own ways, would be offered something the angels were not. A Redeemer, a Savior, God himself would descend from his celestial throne, taking on mortal flesh, bearing the weight of human rebellion, paying the ultimate price so that humanity could be restored to its former glory. The angels, both faithful and fallen, watched this unfolding plan with rapt attention, with a mixture of wonder and rage. Those who remained loyal serve it with unbridled joy, acting as messengers, protectors, and warriors in the ongoing battle for human souls. And somewhere in the deepest recesses of his pride-shrouded heart, Satan rages against it, knowing that this audacious plan will ultimately succeed, that redemption will indeed come. And those who choose the light, who embrace humility and love, will dwell forever in the radiant presence of God. The war that began in heaven continues on earth, played out in the hearts and minds of every human being. But the outcome is not in doubt. Light will triumph over darkness. Love will conquer hate, and every knee, even Satan's, will one day bow before the throne. Not because God forces them to, but because, in the end, truth is undeniable, and the ultimate truth is that God is God, and there is no other. A word to the weary. If you are listening to this tonight, perhaps it is because you are wrestling with your own internal battles, your own temptations, your own moments of pride, doubt, or rebellion. Know this, dear listener, you are not alone. The war that ignited with Lucifer's fall continues to rage within every human heart. The choice between light and darkness, between humility and pride, between love and selfishness is a choice we all face, relentlessly, every single day. But unlike the angels, you have been granted something precious, a gift beyond measure. The opportunity to repent, to turn back from the precipice, to choose again, even after choosing wrongly. That is grace. That is mercy. That is the divine gift that the fallen angels were denied. But that has been extended to you. Do not squander it. Do not allow pride to convince you that you are beyond forgiveness, that you know better than God, or that rebellion will somehow set you free. It will not. It never does. It only leads to the same agonizing fall that Lucifer experienced. But humility, repentance, and surrender to the God who loves you beyond all comprehension, that leads to life, to joy, to the very freedom that pride so falsely promises but can never deliver. Rest now. The story is finished. The war in heaven is over. The fallen have been cast out. The faithful remain in glory. And you, dear listener, are safe, protected by angels who did not fall, loved by a God who will never cast you out if you come to him with a sincere heart. Let this story settle into your mind as you drift towards sleep. Let it remind you that the battles you face are real, but they are not new. They have been fought since before time began, since the dawn of creation. And let it comfort you to know that light has already won. The fallen angels may rage. Satan may scheme. Darkness may seem to prevail for a season, but the morning is coming, the true morning, when the radiant light of God's presence will banish every shadow, when all things will be made new, when those who have chosen rightly will dwell in joy forever. Until that glorious morning, rest in his love. Rest in his protection. Rest in the profound knowledge that you are not fighting alone. The angels who remained faithful watch over you even now. Michael stands guard, his sword raised against the forces of darkness. Rael brings healing to your wounded spirit. Gabriel carries messages of hope, whispering promises of redemption and renewal. And above them all, the God who created you, who knows you intimately, who loves you beyond measure, keeps watch through the long, dark night. Sleep peacefully, beloved. The war in heaven is over. And in the end, love wins. Always and forever, love wins. Good night. May God's peace be upon you. And may you wake tomorrow with the strength to choose light over darkness, humility over pride, and love over all. Amen.